Hello, everyone, whether you're joining us live or you're watching on the recording, and a warm welcome to today's Experts for Expats webinar, How to Successfully Move from Italy to the USA. My name's Alice, and I'm your host for today. We are absolutely delighted to have you join us for today's session, where we will be covering the essential information that you need to know if you're an American citizen considering or currently planning a move to Italy. So many Americans who want to move abroad choose Italy as their destination. It generally has a more relaxed pace of life, cheaper cost of living, an excellent public healthcare system, and a relative ease of obtaining a visa, which we'll be talking about today. What's more, some Americans with Italian heritage will be able to obtain Italian citizenship by descent. So in today's webinar, we are going to be providing more information around the types of visas available to Americans wanting to move to Italy, how to determine if you are eligible to apply for Italian citizenship by descent, the need-to-knows of buying property in Italy, and the tax implications you want to be aware of, as well as tax and financial planning measures that you might need to take before you move. So I'll hand over to our expert speakers to introduce themselves shortly. But before I do, I'll just give a quick overview of how today's session will work. So this webinar is not just about information sharing, it's also an opportunity for you to engage directly with our experts. So we encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A function and to participate in discussions using the chat. Please do not share any personal or sensitive information about your circumstances, though, because this is a public forum. If you need specific help, let us know and we can arrange a formal introduction to an expert. As this is a webinar, you are not on camera or audio. To the right of the screen, you'll find the chat box where you can communicate with other attendees and ask questions. Or to ask a question, simply type your question into the Q&A function, which you'll find in the search bar at the bottom or the chat box, and we will address it either through text or during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have any technical issues or any additional questions, you can always use the chat to inform us. This webinar is also going to be recorded for future reference, and the recording link will be shared with everyone who is attending after the event. We will also share links with you if you want to request an introduction to an expert to provide personalised help to your situation. So let's get started. Welcome to our experts today. I'd love to invite you to introduce yourselves and tell us about your expertise, and also share one key challenge that American citizens will typically face when they move to Italy. So Daniel, let's start with you.
Thank you, Alice. My name is Daniel Shillito, and my business is D&G Property Advice, which I started with my co-founder Giovanni Orlando about 10 years ago. And together, we've lived in Italy for a combined perhaps 40 years, both personally and professionally working here. And I'm a property and finance broker, or advisor, should I say. I'm a CPA as well, back in the day. And I'm an expert in helping and advising foreign citizens to buy in, move to, or retire in Italy. And so in terms of challenges for Americans coming to Italy, it's very difficult to think of only one, because in reality, I think people are going to face lots of different challenges in moving country, that's for sure. For example, when buying property, there are specific challenges. When considering tax and planning issues, there's going to be challenges. And also from immigration, clearly there'll be different challenges. So what I think I'd do is consider an overarching challenge, I suppose, which affects everything that we do in one way or another, and that is dealing with the public administration, I think, in Italy. So in our opinion, this is something that is not straightforward. It's not easy the easiest thing to negotiate, and it's not all simply available online either. So I think, though, the advice I would give is that the administration itself is perhaps not the problem, or the challenge. The challenge is your preparedness for it, and managing your expectations around the public administration and dealing with it. And I think finding the right support and team around you with experience on the ground to help you troubleshoot the public administration.
Fantastic. Thanks, Daniel. And Josh, same question to you. Please introduce yourself, your expertise, and tell us about one key challenge that Americans typically face when they move to Italy.
Sure. My name is Josh Katz. My business is Universal Tax Professionals. I'm a U.S. accountant and CPA, and I'm an expert in U.S. taxes, specifically U.S. expat taxes. When it comes to challenges, I think that with the planning and lots of the challenges can be mitigated. However, the one challenge I would pick is for Americans who move to Italy and have a business in the US or open up a business in Italy, definitely they'll need more planning than the average American who moves to Italy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Josh. Okay, so let's dive into our questions for today. So first of all, we are going to start by talking about visas. So Daniel, we will come to you first. What are the types of visas that are available to American citizens wanting to move to Italy?
Thank you, Alice. So first of all, I just begin by saying that when you come to Italy, most people know that you're entitled to a tourism visa and you can stay for 90 days successively or continuously before needing to leave the country. But then you can come back for another 90 days in the same year. And that's the tourist visa. But to stay any time beyond that, you're either going to need to have citizenship or a visa, naturally. So now, in terms of visas, I'm going to bring up a slide to explain a little bit more. There's working visas and non-working visas, to keep it simple. And so I've divided them into those categories. So visas for Americans that may be wanting to continue to work. I assume you can see this okay, Alice? Great. So here's a quick summary. We don't have time today to go through these in depth, and visas are clearly a complex subject, but I'm going to do my best to do a whistle-stop tour of working and non-working visas, okay? So working visas themselves typically come within two categories of employed or self-employed, and typically the easiest way to get a working visa in Italy requires you to have an employer that sponsors you. Otherwise, it's not going to be easy arriving here and attempting to find a work visa. From a self-employed point of view, visas are quite limited. They tend to be focused by the government into very specific categories, which can change from year to year, and the allocation of available self-employed visas can change from year to year as well. And sometimes they're not even allocated until later on in the year and advised online, and people rush to get to their share of the allocation for a self-employed visa. Everyone may have heard of the nomad visa, the digital nomad visa, that's Italy released recently. They're still working through the application of all of the conditions required for that visa. However, they are allocating some. And what I've got here on screen is a link down the bottom, which I think is the best thing that someone might take away today who are looking for a digital nomad visa. And this is an actual case of someone that's achieved it, they've got the visa, and they're explaining their experience, what they recommend that you should do. And this is much more important, I think, in the early days of a visa, like the digital nomad visa, than compared to some other visas that have been around for years and are perhaps easier to negotiate because many people have been through it. Essentially, you've got to apply for all visas at the foreign consulate. For the digital nomad visa, you'll have to prove you're in a qualifying profession and that you're earning a minimum income level, and you have existing contracts and work that can support your digital nomad activity, etc. in Italy. I'm going to move on now to self-employed, and the most popular, not self-employed, should I say, not working visas. And the most popular visa that people often obtain to come and stay in Italy is the elective residence visa. So this is this one here. That's a 1-year renewable visa. Essentially, it's designed for people that are not going to come here and work. However, during the years of COVID, the conditions changed to some extent in terms of what visas can be renewed in the future. So after your first year, it may be possible to convert your visa and your permit to stay, that is, into a working visa, okay, a working permit. That will depend on several factors. Of course, it has to be accepted that you get a working visa after. But in the beginning, when you first apply, you need to know that it's not for working. So you can't come into and declare you want to be working for this kind of visa. It's designed for retirees. There are specific requirements around that, and you can get those from your consulate, but the main ones include that you have to have an evidence of an existing Italian address, you have to have your health insurance in place, and you have to have evidence of financial security and existing income. Alternatively, there's the investor visa for those that are able to access that, which is obviously a lot easier if you can invest in the country in one of a number of investment destinations, and then you'll be able to achieve or obtain a 2-year Schengen visa. And there's here on the screen, you would have read, we can take a screenshot of the 4 different types of investor visas. That's my quick wrap up of both working and non-working visas.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daniel. So our second question is, who is eligible to apply for Italian citizenship by descent?
Okay, so Italian citizenship can be obtained really in 2 or 3 different ways, but we're going to focus today on this particular question, obviously, and that is descent. And essentially, you have to be able to demonstrate there is descent. Okay, so a person acquires Italian citizenship from when they're born to an Italian father or mother. Okay, simple as that. And the father or mother may even lose their citizenship as a minor, but that is not a problem. As long as they were citizens originally and you are descended from them, you can be entitled to Italian citizenship. Now, so people were born in countries like the USA to Italian citizens that emigrated are entitled to citizenship going back to a law of 1912. That's when it originated. And that law, however, was dependent on the father's citizenship. Okay, so if you've got in your ancestry a male parent who has citizenship, then that can go down the line through the lineage, and as long as it's not interrupted, then the descendants can claim Italian citizenship. It's different if you need to rely on citizenship from the mother's side. From the mother's side, it only became possible thanks to the law in 1948 that recognized citizenship on the female side of the family. So essentially, it's only children that were born to Italian mothers after 1948 that are entitled to Italian citizenship, and that passes down to their dependents, their descendants. Okay, so that's a critical importance between mothers and fathers. So let's say you want to take advantage of this and gain Italian citizenship through your ancestry. How do you go about it? Well, you need to provide proof that your citizenship is uninterrupted, as I mentioned before, and that is that there's no failed foreign naturalization process that may have occurred. So let's say someone that emigrated from Italy has tried to be or attempted to be naturalized, for example, in the US. However, that failed for whatever reason. They weren't eligible for that naturalization process. Well, that's considered interruption, and therefore that their descendants won't be entitled to citizenship. There also needs to be an absence of any renouncing of Italian citizenship through that whole pass back to that qualifying Italian parent. And how do you get those kinds of evidences? Well, the US Citizenship and Immigration Service, the US CIS, they actually can produce for you naturalization certificates and also statements that people were not naturalized from the records in the past when you're doing your research as to discovering and making sure that the citizenship has not been interrupted. So you can apply originally online, and then they'll allocate you, identify the consulate for in-person appointments to take the process through to apply for your citizenship.
Fantastic. Thank you. And so our final question of this section for you, Daniel, what are, and this is potentially a big question, what are the need to knows of buying a property in Italy for US expats?
Okay, so in our opinion, and we've been doing this now for 10 years or so, there's plenty of needs to know in the Italian property market. It's a different market completely to what you've been used to in the US. And I'd start off by saying that the selling culture is very different in Italy compared to the US. So the Italians have a very close relationship to their property. In fact, sometimes we say they believe the property is like a member of the family, okay? And so therefore, letting go of it is it's not easy. It's very difficult and it's very personal. And so, in fact, often the seller will be present at a home inspection when someone goes along to have a look at a property that might want to buy. There may be an agent involved, but the owner himself or herself may in fact be there. And often they may have had that property in their family all of their life. And it's not, so they've come to a point where they're not expected to part with it. They've decided to do it. They're doing it almost begrudgingly. And so this has an impact, as you need to be able to take these things into account and recognize that you're in a different negotiating environment. Okay. And so our advice is really to get advice before you start negotiating in that situation, and understand that the responses and the way of negotiating is very different here in Italy to the US. Another need to know is the agent role here in Italy is quite different as well. And the agent has is required to mediate a successful set of terms and conditions, including price, between buyer and seller. However, in reality, in Italy, most agents start their businesses through obtaining listings. So they tend to act more like a listing agent originally, and have a set of properties available to sell. So you need to be aware of that when you're negotiating with them. So we often advise that people want to approach purchasing a property in Italy by obtaining independent advice and assistance throughout the purchase process. Okay. We also recommend you absolutely take a due diligence approach. So you arrange an inspection of the property, and you get an understanding of the technical history of the property and its legal status. And those things should be done, we think, by an independent professional. Another thing is that you have the notary role within every property purchase in Italy, and the notary is responsible for the conveyancing law, for checking and making sure the title is secure, the title is correct, and it's transferred appropriately to the buyer, and adheres to all of Italy's laws in conveyancing. And that notary can be chosen by the buyer, and that is essential and important for you to know that, and to find one that you can work with and that can help you to take you through the legal processes. And the difference to many countries here is that lawyers and solicitors are not actually necessarily required, because there is the notary that has the responsibility for the conveyancing, the property conveyancing. Some people like to choose a lawyer nonetheless for some peace of mind, to draft particular clauses to help protect them perhaps a little bit more, or when there are complex transactions involved, and that's fine too. Obviously, there are lawyers around to help, but it's not essentially a key requirement for the purchase process. Another thing I'll just touch on quickly, if I've got time, is about finance in Italy. Often people are looking for a mortgage when they come to Italy, and they should understand that Italy is a very different market for mortgages. It's not as competitive perhaps as other markets are. You know, less than 50% of Italians even have a mortgage on property. They don't particularly like mortgages. They don't go seeking them. And as a result, the mortgage market is made up quite differently. And it's also subject to different influences. For example, within the European environment, there are European mortgage directives that require European countries to adhere to certain conditions to protect buyers and borrowers. Okay, so one of them includes the currency of the loan, and it needs to be typically within the currency of the place. And also for many European countries, obviously that's in euros, and the directives also want to make sure that people that are holding other currencies or earning income in other currencies aren't disadvantaged. So it means that there are fewer mortgages possible by institutions and banks and lenders who have made specific products available for these sets of situations. So for example, if you're coming from America, you're likely earning US dollars some way, shape or form. And if you want a mortgage, then you need a specific kind of mortgage, and not every bank in Italy can provide that. So we recommend having a broker, someone that understands all the products across the market and can find one that will suit you in your specific set of circumstances. It won't be a case of going straight into a bank, explaining your situation, receiving a kind of a pre-approval voucher. Those don't really exist in the same way or shape or form as other countries. So you need assistance and advice to make it happen. The other thing I'd say about the purchase process is that it's not necessarily a fast process. Not all sellers are in an urgent rush to get rid of their property, which is a member of the family, as I mentioned. So the average transaction may take 6 months or 7 months. That typically is the case. So you have time to plan the purchase, and there may be some administration involved that takes longer than you think. So you should take that into account in your planning, and perhaps even thinking about it before you leave the US.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daniel. So Josh, we'll come over to you next to talk about US tax. So For Americans moving to Italy, what are the key tax implications that they need to be aware of?
Well, the first thing I think they need to remember is that even though they're moving to Italy, they may be cutting ties with the U.S., they still are required to file a tax return. U.S. citizens, green card holders must file an annual tax return if they earn over a certain threshold. And they have to report their worldwide income. So that income is the U.S. income and any income that they receive from Italy or any countries around the world, and that's passive income or a wage income. However, just because they have to file the tax return and report their income, that doesn't mean they're going to be double taxed. They're not going to necessarily pay taxes twice. And there's a few ways to reduce the amount of tax that they would owe. The first one is the foreign earned income exclusion, which allows Americans living abroad who meet certain requirements to exclude $120,000, that was last year, of their income. And it can be a little more with the foreign housing deduction. And the second way is foreign tax credits. So that would be taxes for Americans who move to, taxes paid in Italy can be used as a credit towards what they pay in the US. So most Americans who live in Italy may pay, no tax or may pay a very small amount of tax. So just because they need to file doesn't mean they're going to pay. The second thing I think is important to remember is there are a few other filing obligations, the FBAR and other FATCA compliance forms. So if you have over $10,000 in aggregate in all of your bank accounts, then you're going to have to file a annual form called FBAR. The tax return is submitted to the Internal Revenue Service, and the FBAR is filed with the U.S. Department of Treasury. It's going to basically list all of your bank accounts, financial accounts, pension accounts outside of the US. And there are big penalties if you do not file the FBAR form. There's also the form 8948, which is very similar to the FBAR that is submitted as part of your tax return. So that's just going to be something a little different, one more filing that you'll have to remember. For most Americans who are moving to Italy, I group them into kind of two categories. One would be Americans who are retiring in Italy, and second would be Americans who are working in Italy. We have lots of clients in each situation, and that really changes the focus of their tax situation. If you're working in Italy, then your wages are going to be from Italy. So, for example, you can use that foreign income exclusion. And if you have more income, if your income's higher than 120,000, then you have other options. You can use foreign tax credits and combine that with the foreign income exclusion. And then if you're retiring, your situation can be completely different because now you're receiving passive income from the US. That's probably going to be taxed first in the US. So it's important to work with an Italian tax advisor and review your tax situation beforehand. Other considerations, Social Security considerations, and retirement account considerations. Those are kind of some areas that you want to plan for. And then the next kind of important thing to remember is a probably important situation that a lot of Americans are if you own a business, if you're self-employed, so you can be self-employed in Italy, you can be self-employed in the US and working in Italy, or you can own an Italian business. So a lot of times Americans think, okay, we'll open up a business in Italy and it will help save, certain taxes, and it may, but that's where really a lot of planning is required. If you are a U.S. owner of a foreign corporation, there's going to be additional forms to file, and there also could be additional taxes. Those taxes can be, mitigated with planning. If you plan ahead, you say, I own this business. This is what it's going to look like. There are ways to then adjust it. Maybe you're going to take out more money as salary or take out money as dividends and reduce it. But these are things that you don't want to have to worry about last year. You have to, you want to start planning for the year before. And if not, then there'll be taxes. The next thing I think is important to remember are the deadlines. So if you live in the US, you're going to file a tax return oftentimes by April 15th because you have all your information, you're ready to file. If you're living in Italy, it's not going to be that simple because you may be waiting on your Italian accountant to prepare your Italian tax return before you can file your US tax return. So most Americans who are living in Italy are going to file an extension before April 15th. There's an automatic extension till June 15th, but once you file the first extension, you'll have till October to file your taxes and even possibly more than that. So the process of filing is also going to become more complicated because you were going to file in coordination with an Italian accountant. And it's not always even as simple as waiting for an Italian tax return, because we might need to provide estimates for your Italian accountant so they can prepare your Italian tax returns, or vice versa. So we may be, working in conjunction. We would oftentimes talk to the accountant beforehand in Italy and discuss what income is filed where first, and that is kind of where the complications begin. And that's why you're not going to be paying twice, but there is going to be a question of where are you going to file first, and what income is going to be filed first. In general, wage income from wages earned in Italy would be filed first in Italy, but maybe U.S. passive income would be filed first in the U.S. So we're going to look at your situation. Do you have only Italian wage income, or do you have a combination of both? And that's usually a decision that we made between your U.S. tax advisor and your Italian tax advisor. Other general considerations would be, estate and gift tax and a residency, but I think that those are the basic. The main thing to remember is that when you're in Italy, you're going to have to file an Italian, you have to file a U.S. tax return, and you're going to want to plan for that. The other way to plan for that is to, your accountant can do estimations and simulations so you can have a better idea. So a lot of times Americans say, well, how much am I going to pay? So that's something also beforehand that can be determined.
Fantastic, thank you. And so then what are the key tax planning measures that US citizens should take before they leave the US? And to add to that question as well, when should they start their tax planning if they're planning to move?
To answer when is harder it depends on your situation. Lots of Americans, especially maybe if they're working in Italy, as opposed to retiring, can move abroad, and tax planning may be less important for them. There are some steps to take, but I would say it would depend when. So, we work with lots of clients who move to Italy, don't do any tax planning, and they're fine. And other times we'll work with clients who move to Italy, and had they made certain decisions beforehand, they might be in a better situation. Something I want to mention is if you're moving abroad, severing state residency. So every state is very different. Some states don't have any they don't have any state taxes. Florida, for example, if you're moving from Florida, there's probably not much you would need to do. However, at the other end of the spectrum would be California. California has a lot of problems letting go of their citizens. So if you're in California and you know that you're going to be moving to Italy, you're not coming back, there are ways to sever your state residency to avoid any tax obligations. Usually you may not have to pay, but you just want to avoid any problems with the California tax board, because at that point you don't want to get a letter saying that you're going to owe. And then the next thing is just general tax planning, because when you move abroad, your situation in your life is changing a lot. So even if you're all these changes need to be considered. So there's a difference. We work with lots of Americans who want to retire in Italy, and they love being in Italy, and so they're just needing general retirement advice. They may have a lot of savings in different U.S. sources. So what are the right time for them to withdraw? And now that's more complex because they're going to have another tax system. So they should have tax planning advice maybe in general if they were staying in the U.S., but now they're going to just need more tax planning because there's other moving parts. And a lot of planning, I think, would have to do with the retirement accounts. Something else, now you're going to have to plan for the FBAR and FATCA as we talked about. I don't think that's going to require too much planning in general. But what does require planning a little bit is timing. Something else to mention is the foreign income exclusion, which I talked about before. You have to live for a full year. So because of that, you may say, okay, I want to, move on January 1st so that I'll be covered for the entire year, or at least understand this is how much I can get. But more importantly, though, there are two tests to meet with the foreign income exclusion. You either have to have the bona fide residence test or the physical presence test. Physical presence means you're in the country for 330 days out of the year. So make sure you're out of the U.S. for that one. So you may want to start planning your trips back. So you can't move to Italy and then every other month live in the U.S. and still be able to claim the foreign income exclusion. So that is very important. Your trips back to the U.S. and the amount of time you're going to spend to the U.S. And then The last thing I would say is your business structure. So you may have a certain type of business, or you may be starting a business, but you're going to have different decisions. Let's say you are in Italy and you want to open a business. Are you going to open a US business, or are you going to open an Italian business? And what type of US business would you open, and what type of Italian business would you open? There's no one simple answer. Oh, this is the best type of business. But each one of them is going to have, if you open a US business, now you're going to have some Italian tax implications. So sometimes we'll meet with an Italian tax advisor and go over what that's going to look like for your taxes in Italy, or vice versa. You're going to open up an Italian corporation, and now we're going to talk about, okay, this is what it's going to look like in the US. Other types of just general tax planning, if you have gift tax implications, or estate tax, or capital gains and investments, those are something that you would want to plan for, but now they're going to become a little more complicated because there's the Italian side you're going to want to think about as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Josh. And Daniel, just back to you for a final question before we move on to audience questions. So if you do have a question for either Daniel or Josh, we will come to you next. So please do pop it in the chat or in the Q&A. But as a final question for you, Daniel, what about financial planning measures that US citizens might want to take before moving to Italy?
Okay, well, it's a really important question, because I think that from our point of view, there are three big things you've got to get right before you want to consider relocating to Italy. One is your living situation with your property, whether you're buying or renting. The other one is your immigration situation. What visa do I need? How am I going to make that work? And finally, tax and financial planning. And financial planning includes how you're going to look after your investments, how they're going to translate to a life in Italy. But it also includes what I would call a strategic tax approach. So if you can understand how Italy is going to tax your assets, whatever they are, including your financial assets, your pensions, your 401k, your ISA accounts, your managed funds, your direct shares, the various types of assets that people have. There's so many different ones to consider. We can't consider them all now, but Italy will tax them in some way or form, because in Italy, you're taxed on your worldwide income once you become Italian tax resident. So you need to take that into consideration from the beginning, I suppose, from the get-go. So this will overlap a little bit with what Josh was saying, in that I believe it's very good, very important to plan before you leave. Be prepared to get professional advice. It's worth it to get the right advice from professionals that understand how it works. So that you can decide if you need to make any decisions before you leave, whether you want to sell an asset first. You may want to consider that, or whether it's even a property, or whether it's one of your investments before you leave, because there's a better tax overall result for you. So there is a difference between strategic tax planning, which can happen before you leave, and annual filing and taxes when you get here and you've already been here for a year. So I don't think it's wise to just leave it until the annual filing deadlines happen once you're in Italy and at the end of the Italian tax year. So I think it's important to understand in advance how Italy's going to tax those assets and your business structures, etc., so that you can plan better and know before you leave how things are going to be treated. I think that it's also important to understand when you are going to become Italian tax resident in Italy. There may be things that you do before you leave, or there's the timing and when you leave, whether you leave in the first half of the year or the second half of the year, which will actually influence when your first tax returns are due to be lodged in Italy and when you actually become tax resident in Italy. So there's little nuances that people don't realize when they're planning their life based on other factors, or maybe they found a property they fell in love with and make some decisions and then find out later, oh, if I just waited and left 3 months later, I may not have to do this. I may not become a tax resident until another time that was more convenient or appropriate, etc. So planning, I think, is very important in that respect from a strategic tax point of view. From an investment point of view, I might just touch on a couple of things briefly, because this is not the environment to be able to provide great guidance, because financial advice is very specific and tailored, and people really need to get professional advice that's suited to their circumstances, particularly to get the right kind of advice. But there are some investments that Italians in the Italian environment that Americans may find or consider they might want to invest in, but they may not be appropriate according to the US tax rules. And that's where clearly working with a tax advisor like Josh, you can understand that before you even consider investing in them. I mentioned opportunities, perhaps sell an asset, maybe consolidate an asset, or maybe set up something in euro currency before you leave. You may in fact want to exchange US dollars into euro in some situations, depending on the timing of when you're going, how long until you go, to reduce the risk of getting a bad exchange rate, essentially, on the day that you decide to leave or shortly thereafter. You may transfer some cash into euro accounts ready for your living expenses, but maybe even some savings as well. And so it's good to consider that, I think, as well, from a planning perspective before you go. Finally, I'd say that once you understand the lay of the land, how Italy taxes things, people would have seen and read about some tax concessions that are available for new residents in Italy. And there are three main ones that people might want to consider. One of them is the new tax resident scheme, which is available for people in a certain wealth situation where they may be able to pay a limited amount of tax annually under this new tax resident scheme and not have to declare their foreign incomes and their foreign assets to the Italian government. And that new tax resident scheme provides for a flat amount of 200,000 euros paid to the Italian government each year without needing to declare anything else from around the world, including all your American assets. Another scheme is called the Lavoratori Impatriati scheme, which is for like returned workers, which was originally designed for Italians returning, trying to attract them back to Italy, but now it's still eligible for Americans as well. You can, if you come to Italy, become newly tax resident, and if you meet the requirements of that scheme, then you get a deduction in the amount of your income, your employment income that's actually taxed. Okay, this is for workers in Italy. This scheme, and it was introduced 4 or 5 years ago. They've changed the rules in January, made it a bit harder, made the qualifications a bit harder for the type of work that you do. However, it's still something to look into. And finally, there's a 7% pension tax concession scheme available if you move into a particular area and you live within an area that is not densely populated. In fact, it has 20,000 people in the surrounding area, and there's a number of them in about 8 or 10 different Italian regions. And if you actually move to a region in there that's, as I said, fewer than 20,000 residents, then you can opt for this pension reduced tax scheme on your pension income when you move there to retire, which could be something that could save you a lot of money. So it's definitely worth considering before you leap and even decide where you're going to live.
Brilliant. Thank you, Daniel. So we've had a few questions come in on visas, but before we circle back round to that, just on topic, Josh, a question for you that's come up. Are there any specific investments that are likely to be heavily taxed in the US and that US citizens should avoid?
I should have mentioned this. Yeah, what's called a PFIC, which is a foreign mutual fund. So from a U.S. tax perspective, we recommend, there's no good way around investing in foreign mutual funds anywhere outside the U.S. So you're safe investing from a U.S. tax perspective in anything in the U.S. mutual funds. You have other investment options. You can invest in any single stock, fund, real estate in Italy or abroad. But when it comes to mutual funds or grouped funds, so the equivalent of an ETF or index fund, those can be very problematic, and there aren't really good workarounds. So sometimes some financial advisors have ways that they would invest for you that would not be in a PFIC, so they may be investing for you, but in general, you would just want to avoid them.
Brilliant, thank you. So a couple of questions come in on visas. Firstly, if I buy a property in Italy, does that mean I can stay in Italy for as long as I want, Daniel?
That's a good question. I wish it was the case. It would make life much more simple for many, many people around the world. But no, if you come into Italy and you're not an EU citizen and you're looking for a visa, then buying property won't facilitate legal right to stay in the country. You will still be subject to a tourist visa, even if you own a property. you won't have any stay rights. So you do need to start a separate visa process. But it means that as an investor in property, you can buy a property without needing to have residency on the flip side. So you may not be ready to, in fact, move to Italy, or you may be thinking about it. You might then set up a plan to move in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. But in the meantime, you could buy your property because there's no barrier or hurdle for Americans to buy property in Italy. Okay, so you could buy the property first, maybe use it for a bit of holiday as a second home in Italy, and then you could decide to move it in the future when you get your visa sorted out. So that's the way it works.
Brilliant, thank you. And then a bit of a catch-22 situation that I imagine comes up a lot. To get a visa, you have to have an address in Italy. But how do you get an address in Italy before you get a visa?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's something that we get asked about a lot because the visa requirements, especially for the elective residence visa and the digital nomad visa, does require a proof of where you are residing in Italy already. And it does sound a bit like, how is that going to be possible? So you do need to obviously, preferably, travel to Italy, which I assume that you would do in any case, to understand where you want to live and to find a place that's going to be right for you. So while you're doing that travel on a tourist basis, that's the best time to work out, okay, where do I want to live? Do I want to buy first, or do I want to rent? So going back to the previous answer, you do have that option of buying first and having your home before you move legally or to retire. And so in that particular case, once you've got that property, that could be your address for the application because you own it, it's yours, this can be where you're going to stay in future, and that's the simplest in a sense. Alternatively, if you're not ready to buy or you're not sure where you want to live, etc., then you do have to look at getting a lease on a property to stay in Italy, so you can provide that address to the consular authorities in your application process. And Italy does have rules around letting properties, but typically the consulates will need to see a contract of at least 12 months term. Okay. Now, this is a question that's very particular to consulates, which could have different approaches actually in different places in the States. So you need to ask the consulate specifically about the requirements for the visa and about, therefore, the living situation. And if you choose a place to rent, are they looking for a lease of 12 months? Are they looking for something longer? Are they looking for special clauses? Because these things are real factors that need to be considered before you make your application for the visa. So a good thing to get some advice about that and understand how the lease affects the visa application process and work that out. And the consulates generally are pretty good in answering these questions for you and helping you to prepare. But you know, there may be ways in which you can get a lease in Italy. It may not be the place you want to live forever. It may not be the place you even come back to in 3 or 6 months when you've got your visa, but you do need to have that address in Italy, and so it becomes either renting or buying.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So the next question, potentially for both of you, so I don't mind who wants to take it first. Taking kind of everything we've discussed into account today, what kind of timeline should I prepare for my move to Italy? So to include everything, including visa application, finding a property, sorting out my tax planning. What's a realistic timeline to complete that move from the US to Italy?
First, it depends. So everyone has their own tax situation. It may be the year before you're moving, you're going to want a better sense of what your taxes are going to look like next year, and then what you can do about it. So maybe you're going to want to sell certain funds before you leave, or make changes to your retirement accounts. But oftentimes there's nothing you need to do, with double taxation and with tax credits. So there's no double taxation, for lots of times tax planning is not necessary. So it's really going to depend on your situation. I assume that everything on Daniel's side is going to take a little longer, but definitely no more, I think, than 2 years. But for lots of, we talk to people all the time who want to make a decision where they're going to move to, and that's where we can let them know. So, run simulations and do some tax planning to let them know this is what your tax situation is going to look like if you choose to move to Italy. And so that can be done, at any point.
Great. Thanks, Josh. So Daniel, what about the visa, the property timeline?
Right. So With visas, some consulates can get backed up with appointment setting, and it can be difficult actually to find the spot you want when you're ready to go. So I think the earlier the better to plan. If you've got the desire, the dream is there to do it and do it in a reasonable time frame, then the earlier you get started, the better. That's my first suggestion, because you might be ready to go, understand the visa that's right for you, contact the consulate, and they say, well, the next available appointment is March 15 or something like that, and you go, oh dear, I didn't expect that. So the earlier the earlier the better. I think if it's selective residence visa, which is one of the most popular ones, which many people perhaps watching this could be aiming for, once you get all your paperwork together and you get that property piece sorted out, which is clearly a major piece, and then go to the consulate with the application, if they receive it and they say, yes, all your documents are good, you're ready to go, you got the address, normally it'll take around 3 months or so to process it, and then you can pick up the visa and then make your entry into the country. So if you plan that time frame, that's a bit of a general, without too many appointment setting delays at the consulate, that's kind of the time frame that you should take into account. And when you're buying property, if for example, it depends again on your desires. If you want to fly and the first place you move to is the house you just bought when you go, well, then work backwards and say it could take 6-7 months in the transaction process. So you can start looking online, you can do a viewing trip perhaps once and come back, so that you get a good feel for the property and know that it will take that time frame before you can have the property ready to go. So I think there's some guidelines that can help people to plan their timing.
Excellent, thank you. Josh, question for you potentially. So you mentioned about breaking state residency depending on where you are, but does it make sense to give up US citizenship for Italian citizenship? And if so, how easy is that to do?
Okay, so good question. That really depends. So definitely you have to file a tax return every year. If you're American, most likely an F-bar, and most likely the tax return. And if you're not going to file it yourself, you're going to go to a professional, you have that fee. So if you were not American, you would save yourself a tax filing fee. In my opinion, usually that's not enough for you to give up your citizenship. After that's going to depend on your situation. If you have lots of ties to America and you benefit from America, go back to America, visit America. Sure, if you're going to stay in Italy forever, then definitely I would not recommend giving up your Italian citizenship. But sometimes there are a situation where you could be in a financial position where you would be better off. And if that's the case, then that's something that can be done. Usually you'll have to make sure to be current with your taxes, file a few forms. It's going to depend on your net wealth. So if you're over a certain amount of net wealth, then you would need to pay an exit tax. And if you're under, maybe you wouldn't, and you can get around that. But I think that this is where type of planning is going to need to be involved to see, okay, what is your tax? So we talk to a lot of people who say, I want to move to Italy, and then and then I won't have to worry about paying taxes anymore. But it's good to know, what would that look like? So what would it look like before, and what would it look like after? The process is I wouldn't say too grueling, but again, what's the benefit from giving up your U.S. citizenship? Now you won't have U.S. citizenship. You definitely want to file a tax return, so that's for sure. But besides that, what are your financial what's your finance going to look like in the future, that where you would save taxes? But again, because there's no double taxation in general, then it's not always something that's going to be a huge benefit for you. We work with clients sometimes, for example, who move to other countries. If you're moving to a country that doesn't have any tax, like the UAE, well, then maybe you would be saving a lot of, and you're a high income earner, then you could be in a situation where you would save a lot of U.S. taxes by giving up your citizenship. But in Italy, it's oftentimes not the case. So it's not. It might be easy, but it's not a big benefit.
That makes sense. Thank you, Josh. And then we've just got one final question before we wrap up for the hour, and that is how, potentially for you, Daniel, I would imagine, how do I go about choosing the best area of Italy to live in? Are there any areas of Italy that are more friendly for Americans, for example?
That's a good question. Look, Americans have settled successfully in many different parts of Italy now. That perhaps wasn't the case 30 years ago when they discovered under the Tuscan sun and charming Tuscany environment. Clearly, that's very popular, and lots of people have settled there, not only Americans, naturally, because it's such a beautiful place to be. So that is still popular. People still go there, and there's more and more resources then that where they're speaking English, where there's little communities that do different things, have activities, hobbies, etc., that are more in English and perhaps have more American community, I would say. There's many small towns too within Tuscany on the coast, or even in Florence. There's a great community, obviously in and around Florence. I think some Americans have also found a great lifestyle in some surrounding regions like Umbria, okay, and also in Liguria on the coast, and also on the Amalfi Coast down further south, but also up on Lake Como, right? We've all heard about some stories about places there, and they are beautiful places to live, great lifestyle, and good access to resources, health resources, good health institutions and infrastructure in each of those regions, I would say. I don't think there's any one place that is the most recommended, desired. You need to come and experience it for yourself. I think that's what I would say. And then some people choose to come and rent for a while just to determine if this is the place I want to live at. Ultimately, they maybe have the immigration and everything else in process, or maybe not, but they come and they stay for a bit. Even if they stay for the 90 days of your tourism time in one location to get a feel for it, that could be worthwhile, rather than, you know, potentially making a mistake and going someplace where you thought you would go and you set up all your financial situation, maybe a tax concession I was referring to, and then 5 years later say, oh dear, I wish I'd gone to the other end of Italy or something like that. So there's no substitute for getting in a plane and coming and experiencing it to work out what's best for you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Daniel and Josh, for sharing your insights today. Thank you so much to everyone who came along. We will be sharing the webinar recording afterwards with everyone who signed up. So if there's any bits you didn't quite catch, the recording will be with you soon. So please look out for that in your email inboxes. In the webinar chat, you'll see that a couple of links have been shared. So if you would like to book in a free discovery call with either of our guests today, just fill in the relevant link in those chats. We'll also email those to you after the session along with the recording. And if you have any other questions about moving abroad or any aspect of finances, relocation, you will find plenty of blogs, guides and resources on our website, expertsforexpats.com. So thank you very much again to our panelists, and thank you for everyone attending today. Have a great rest of your day.